seaweed. It's filthy, yet here are the gentlefolk out in their nice shoes, ignoring the mud splashing onto the silk and synthetic leather, delighting in the novelty. 3 stories above, where the highest tides normally lap twice a day and the above water portion of the city begins, windows are glazed with kaleidoscopic glass and rimmed with glaring neon and flickering screens. Down here, it's all been broken out through the centuries since the tides shifted and the original city was washed through to ruin. See, I could have just read that and I didn't have to give the whole spiel that
Yeah. Unfortunately,
So
I made there be a
clumsily gave
glitch in
first.
the middle. So I apologize to everybody. I was take a break here really quick. I was trying to get the chat open so that I could talk to everybody. And I accidentally stopped it.
Oh.
So I'm hoping that it's streaming now. If anybody is out there in the stream and wants to put something in the chat so I know for sure that it's working, I would really appreciate it. See, I'm trying to see. I'm going to hang on just for a second to make sure that we're okay, because I'm thinking we might not be. Let's see. Go back.
They walk streets.
Okay. I think I might have ended up with then two recordings. Oh no. All right. Good evening, everybody. Okay. No? All right, guys. I'm really sorry. We're gonna hang on here just for a second. So I make sure I can get everybody. Yeah, okay. We may have fatally killed this. Let me no, it says it's still live streaming. So you guys are watching all this. I'm really sorry. Oh my goodness. Yeah. I have fatally killed this. Oh yeah, see, it has a delay too. So then I'm like, what? Okay. All right, here everybody's coming back. All right. We're gonna mute this. All right. So I might have you read it one more time. I'm so sorry.
I'll read something different then, because I feel like that just said everything that I already told everybody. So let's see.
Okay, I'm just checking to see how it behaved. Like if we lost everybody in the middle, or if it. Okay, it's back. I'm asking if everybody heard the reading or if we should start again. Thought it wasn't just me. No. It definitely wasn't just you, Karen. Sorry. And I think there's always a delay a little bit too. They said they heard up to the gondola and the tether ferry. So maybe we will have you just read a little something else for and we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out later how to like put the two back together in post-production.
Perfect. Well, I'll read from a little further on and a couple paragraphs later.
Okay.
Bands thrum beats into the newly uncovered plazas. The ferrymen, their gondolas dry docked tonight, their hovercraft unneeded, offer to guide the revelers on tours of the lower levels. Giant sentry spiders, normally confined to rooftops and bridge decks, stalk the street on spindly robotic legs. Someone's tied a bright nylon scarf around the leg of this one. The single unblinking eye in its belly whirs as it scans the crowd, shutter clicking at a suspicious face. It continues on. The residents of the city's lower half have taken cover as the residents of the upper half descend, but not all can hide. Barnacles, mussels, limpets encrust the stone walls, unable to run as enterprising foragers pry them off to be served on the night specials menus. Anemone clamp tight and sandy and sullen against the prodding fingers of toddlers. waiting desperately to unfurl when the tide comes back in. Crabs peer from under crumbling walls, minnows flounder in the dwindling tide pools splashed about by revelers. They're not the only ones left vulnerable tonight.
Ooh, that was a good one. That was a good place to stop. I'm really curious as a writer and as somebody who talks to a lot of writers, both like in the context of the bookstore, but also just talking to other writers, like mentoring situations and stuff. One of the hardest things is to decide where to start a story. And I'm curious with this particular book, particularly because they're of the constraints. I mean, it's not long. Like, how did you decide how you were going to begin the story and introduce the whole setup?
Yeah. Well, one of the things and then maybe this was a dangerous choice. I guess I'll say that instead of a bad choice, because it's hard, with writing, who knows?
Yeah.
But I did start with a lot of kind of description of the city. And, people say, get right to the action.
Yeah.
Start with a gun, gunshot going off somewhere, right in the middle of everything. And I do get to the action.
I was going to say, it doesn't take too long.
It doesn't take too long. But I really wanted to set the scene because the city is almost as much a character as the humans that are exploring it all night long. So I wanted to paint this picture and then narrow in on a moment that happens later in the story. And then I kind of flash back. Yeah. And part of that is this kind of narrative, I guess, a narrative experiment that I did that Patrick Swenson, who is the publisher, was very helpful in helping me sort out how to do it well. Because there is, as I mentioned, Adria is kind of the main character. And so we follow her adventures, but we are following her adventures from a first person point of view, who we don't find out who that person is until later. And so, at the very beginning, it's like this kind of opening of the story. And then, oh, wait, let me tell you, I need to back up and tell you more before we get to that point. Let me start over. And you're like, wait, who's this person that's talking?
Yeah.
So,
well, and that is even captured in the flap copy a little bit about how it's like, what's going on here? I actually, I was asking people to go ahead and post questions that we could ask later, but I actually think Jonathan asked a question that is appropriate for now. Given the length, I mean, it's not a long story, but like you still create this world. Like how did the world building, how did doing the world building for this story compare to doing the story for a novel? Like, do you end up doing a similar amount or less because it's like one moment in time? Like how did that compare for you?
Yeah, I guess as a writer, my world building tends to be very minimal. And so I know some people will spend years just like developing the world and languages and trade routes and things like that. And I have a series of unpublished fantasy novels that I've spent like my entire high school and college was like building this massive world that I was playing in. But beyond that, most of my world building is like as needed.
Yeah.
And so with a novel series and the Bellari Saga series and the Durga system, or the Nancy Chronicles series, they're both set in the same world. And so each book requires more and more knowledge of how this world works. And so I had to set things up pretty deliberately at first, where I was like, all right, I can't just make that up willy-nilly and expect that to last for, 7 books later when I'm like, oh my gosh, why did I say that? So I was a lot more deliberate. But with this book, it was like, if a detail needed to be said, I would spend a minute thinking about it. But really, it was just like, what's kind of downloading from my brain right now, and does it make sense-ish? Like, are there other cities on this planet? Probably. I don't know. Like, who are all these corporations that are also like playing the scavenger hunt? I don't know. Why? I mean, I know why, because that was important. I had to figure that out. But yeah, a lot of it was just very as needed.
Yeah. I'm curious, you mentioned the corporation thing, and I'm not gonna say a ton because there's a lot that is fun about like what you discover, but there's definitely an individual person against what turns out to be more corporate entities. Was that just kind of something that happened? I mean, like readers are always looking for a larger meaning in the story. And like, was that something that you think just came out of your head just because it worked? Or was there something maybe a little bit more in that for you?
I think with I'm really drawn to like sci-fi visions of the future that are corporate run, and not because I like the idea of that, just because that seems so legit that would be what happens.
Yeah.
Like Neil Stephenson's, I think it's Snow Crash, where like entire towns are like you're in the Taco Bell town, or you're in, the whatever corporate town, and like everything else is wasteland. I think that was maybe one of my first experiences with that. But yeah,
I
it's
know
such
we
a
have
good
some
book.
of the books in the store, but yeah, I need to look that up.
Yeah. But yeah, so it just, the idea that things like corporations just have so much more power than everybody else, that's the case now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it seems very like, yeah, I guess that there is part of me that's like, stories
Yeah.
one
I
person
mean, I
going up
think
against
we
man.
ask these questions of writers like, oh, what did you mean by this? Or what's the symbolism and stuff? And I think,
Yeah.
like, I mean, everything that we write comes from things that we're mulling over, we're thinking about, or rattling around in our heads. So in the end, it kind of is a statement from us, but not in the sort of, yeah, I thought about this and I wanted to say this one thing. It's usually a little bit more subtle than that. But I'm curious if there was an inspiration for the city, even if it was just kind of like a feeling or a vibe of, from places that you visited.
Yeah, I think my grandma would take us to the Oregon coast when we were growing up for spring break. And so I would just loved looking at like going out to the tide pools and like the passage I just read about like the sea anemones, like, and the prodding toddlers' fingers. And like, sorry to all the sea anemones. And I'm like,
like we all done that. What happened?
So I think it was really, it wasn't a specific city that I'd been to, but really just more inspired by that, like, that feeling of like low tide at the Oregon coast and what kind of treasures might you find out there.
I definitely got that. It also reminds me a little bit of like I think I felt like there was a little bit of Venice in there too, or those, types of cities where there's enough water going through the cities, like a couple of the cities in like Amsterdam, or I'm sorry, Netherlands or Belgium, like where there's gondolas or boats like going through the city too. It was got a little bit of that feeling as well. So that was fun.
Oh, and I should real quick. This is probably going to be a plug, I guess, maybe a little later for pre-ordering from you guys, but this is a postcard that I made for the city Terry by the Sea. And anyone who pre-orders gets a copy of this postcard. Yeah. So I will literally mail you a postcard. But I wanted to show you
that's your art.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It's really cool. I mean, I love that. I think it's really a fascinating. I think what I love about this book, other than just that the story is cool, is that, I mean, and this is kind of segue into my next question or a later question, but there's just, when you create a story like this where some of it's submerged, like we were talking about world building, and it's like you've almost just done that in one fell swoop because you've created this whole history just by having the city, like half submerged so long ago. I just love that sort of feeling of history behind it, and how easily that was achieved just by the setup of the whole book.
Yeah. And I think that's something that's always fascinated me, especially in places where there's a lot more visual evidence of like cultures building on each other over and over again. Like we were in France earlier this year. We went to a town called Arles, where there's a Roman stadium that was built like in the 5th century or sometime around then. And it was like, it's been restored, but people eventually started living in it after the Roman Empire kind of crumbled. And at one point, like, people had built houses along the outside. There was a town square. There's a church in the middle of it. It was like a fortified little city. And then eventually, like around the 1800s, they kind of bought out and cleared up all those houses and restored it back to the Roman building. But you can still see, like, that's where the roof marks were, like in kind of a peak over the, the archway or whatever. And we found in this antique bookstore, we found a drawing of what it had looked like when all the buildings were like built up in it, which I was so excited to find. But I love that, like, you can see kind of the past of a city written in its architecture, and Terry by the Sea is definitely that kind of city where you're like, well, here's the unexplored lower part of the city that no one's been in for centuries. But then at one point, Adria even goes into like this temple from a civilization nobody even really remembers what they were called, like, but so there's like even deeper layers and deeper layers, and that was fun.
That's very cool. Well, and that kind of brings up, and I'm trying to figure out how to formulate a question about this, but I think it's really fascinating, and I wonder if you notice this as a storyteller, using shared reference to as part of your story building. I guess a back information for this was, we were in book club on Saturday, and we were talking about books from the 1800s and how sometimes they're very hard to get through because they spend so much time describing. And we were talking about the fact that you didn't have the same shared cultural touch points as we do, and the same ability to go, oh yeah, I know what a giraffe looks like. You don't have to tell me. Or I know what the Roman Colosseum looks like because I've seen a picture of it, or I've seen a show about it. And I'm curious, as a writer, like, do you ever think about the fact that we don't have to describe stuff in maybe as much detail because we have so much shared history as a sort of a world planet, so you describe a underground city that no one's lived in for a while, and I think most of us can like call up images of what that might look like maybe more easily, and you described it, but like I can add layers upon layers to that. I'm just curious if you ever think about that as a storyteller.
No, I haven't, but that's such an interesting idea, that especially the concept of like, I don't have to go into detail about what Times Square looks like. We've all either been there or seen pictures or whatever, like you can just say there was a lot of neon and billboards and things like that, and everyone's like, yeah, I got it. Yellow taxis, I've seen I've seen the movies. But yeah, even with science fictional worlds where, I mean, obviously we haven't all seen a movie about Terry by the Sea, I feel like I could maybe paint in more lighter strokes because I trust your imagination will fill in all the gaps. And so we have such rich fodder for imagination with all of the different movies and things. You might have called up more of like a Star Trek world, or somebody else might have called up more of like, an Altered Carbon or Star Wars world, or, like there might be different flavors that are in everyone's head, but just painting those strokes like lets everyone else fill out the details.
I just think that's an interesting thing to think about. And the more stories we read, the more shared, the more books are, the more we're all reading, the more shared experiences there are, the more then. The interesting thing to me is that it doesn't necessarily mean that you write less. It just means that you focus on different things. I
Mhm.
guess, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, and you
Um,
don't have to spend so much time like painting the backdrop.
yeah, yeah,
You can
yeah.
focus in on the characters and
And
those.
whether or not that makes us more impatient, I don't know,
I think there's a certain amount of
but yeah,
impatience and
yeah. I mean, that's
okay,
kind of
let's
baked
get to the
into a
point.
lot of things. But Travis asked an interesting question because we were talking about how you chose where to start the story. And he asked, like, how do you choose where to end the story? And that's actually relevant to this story because and I know I don't want you to give anything away, so we can't like talk about, well, how does this story end? But it does end in a very particular place, and it could have gone on a little bit if you had wanted it to. So
Mhm.
how do you, as a storyteller, and this book or any other book, like decide, okay, I've said enough, you know?
Yeah, it's a hard question because I think I tend to be like, and the action's over, let's be done. And I've actually had my editor, Kira Freestyle, she's edited all my books. And with at least two of them, she's been like, you need something more here. You can't just stop at this scene. We need a little bit of the aftermath and like, calm us down and tease the next thing or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so I feel like, there's an art to ending after the climax of the book, but not so far after that everyone's like, what's happening? Why are we still talking? But yeah, so I guess I chose I chose kind of a timeline constraint as well, right? So it's the course of a single night.
Yeah, that's true.
So
Yeah.
at the end of the adventure, the night is over, and I, kind of tease a little bit about the future, but it's very, yeah,
Yeah, no,
within
that's
the
true. I
course of a
hadn't
night.
thought about that, but yeah, it does end at the end of the night. Yeah, I'm terrible at endings. I find them very difficult, so I'm always curious to hear other people
Yeah.
talk about them because I'm like, okay, yeah, I don't know. Some stuff happens and that's it.
Yeah, exactly.
Beginnings are way earlier. And Karen Eisenbray likes the postcard, and she said that was very cool. So
Oh, thanks, Karen.
I'm curious. We talked a little bit about at the beginning about a novelette versus a novella versus a novel. And now you've done some short story work.
Mhm.
You've got this novelette and you've done novels, obviously. How did you find the writing process? Because it's kind of a weird, there's things about writing a short story that's an art in and of itself. Like you have to constrain yourself in some way so you don't just turn it into a novel. But this is something a little bit more than that. Like how did you find like that art of slotting it in, or did you just kind of write the story and see what it wanted to be before you decided, oh yeah, okay, this is a novelette?
Yeah. I started the story. I think I was going for a short story, and I kind of had the bones of what was happening, and then I abandoned it because I do that a lot with short stories where I'm like, I wrote for a bit and I'm not sure where it's going, and maybe it'll come to me someday. And then Patrick actually approached me and said, hey, I've got this line of novelettes. And he showed me some of them, and I was like, I love just that little format. It's adorable.
Yeah. Yeah.
He said, if you wanted to submit something, I would love to see it. So I was like, all right, how do I write a novelette? So I ended up, I looked for like some of the best, like award-winning, and nominated novelettes over the last few years. And I ended up just reading a bunch of stories and was like, okay, now I'm getting a sense for about how much story you can fit in that amount of words. So let's see if I can do that.
Yeah. What did you find that was uniquely difficult about this length versus a short story or a novel?
I
If
think,
anything, I mean, maybe there wasn't.
yeah, I think it was knowing how much detail to include, because with a short story, any detail that's in it is pretty important, right? So You know, you can't be like, the car was red and it had vinyl decals, and like spend a bunch of time describing the car and then move on. And people are like, what's so important about the car?
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
and if it never comes back. But so as opposed to a short story, I could have a little bit more breathing room to be like, I'm going to describe the giant sentry spider, and it's fine. Like, now we're moving on.
Yeah.
But you also you couldn't have a bunch of like random subplots, which I love. I love like opening up a new can of worms and be like, well, we'll come back to this in 5 books and see what happens.
Yeah.
And so that has been my writing process for novels, is I'm just like, oh, and then here's a can of worms. Here's a can of worms. And so there was very much a limit on cans of worms that I could open in this book.
Yeah, that is an interesting point, because you can't really, but given that you managed to open multiple cans of worms in my mind anyway, just so you know.
Yeah.
So that leads me to, is this a world that you think you'd ever play in again? Because there's definitely some things I'm like, well, what will happen with this, or what happened before, or what's going to happen to the main character now, and or other characters. And
I didn't write it with plans to, but then my husband read it and he was like, I want more of this. Write more of this world.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's kind of what I'm thinking. Like,
he loves like Ian M. Banks and that kind of his big like weird worlds where he's also writing all these like incredibly detailed, like evocative settings, and then kind of he's got one book that's all about like a game that's happening, like everyone's converging on this planet to play a game before like the planet is destroyed or something like that. And so that, I think, is what triggered my husband being like, this reminds me of Ian Banks and I love it and I want more of it. So I've promised him I will write more someday, but I'm not sure. I don't have concrete plans.
We'll hold you to that too.
Yeah.
So he has backup now. I was going to move over to some of the other books that you've written. Can you talk a little bit about, I don't know if you've got them nearby at all. Mine are all in the house, so I don't have them out here with me, but you've got the Bolari Saga and the Nancy Chronicles. I think I have that right.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about those? Because we have those, we have the Nancy Chronicles in the store, and I've been thinking about maybe we need to pick up the other ones as well, but for now we have those. So if you could talk a little bit more about those other books.
Let me see if I... Here we go. So this is the Nancy Chronicles, which you can buy from Vintage Books right now. This is the first book. It's a series of it's kind of ongoing at this point. There's 4 of them out now, but I call them like space outlaw shenanigans. Every book is kind of this crew of kind of a fun Firefly type found family crew, and every book they're going on a new kind of criminal type adventure. So if you're familiar with the TV series Leverage, it's kind of a merry band of criminals who are doing crime for good, and that's the vibe I was going for with these books. I loved Leverage, and so I was like, how do I write this like fun episodic adventure?
Yes, the best word I can use to describe them is a romp. Like they just are fun. And we actually read the first one for a book club this month, and I told the crew that the reason that I chose that one is we had a really kind of dense collection of Chinese folk or Chinese like fantasy stories in translation, which was a lot. I mean, it was dense, and it was coming from a different cultural perspective, and I was like, I just needed something really fun to come after that was light and fun. And I've read the first one. My daughter got a hold of the first one, and she was like, can you buy the rest of them? And so she's finished the whole series. Awesome. But I understand that those books are related to the other series. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So this is the first book of the Bolari Saga. And the Bolari Saga is the series that I wrote first, and it's the like I didn't know where I was going, big 5-book arc thing. I will actually real visually, I'll show you how I didn't know where I was going. Here's all 5 of them. Book 5 is almost twice as long as book 1, just because I was like opening cans of worms and couldn't figure out how to close them. So they just kept getting bigger and bigger. And that is, it's not set in space. It's on the planet, or it's on a planet, again, in a city where, the city of Bellaria, which is kind of its own character. And there's all these underworld factions that are fighting, and the main characters are kind of having to basically save the world. They're kind of in the grayish underworld, trying to get a little bit more respectable, but have to dive back into their old histories of crime in order to save the world, which is very important.
Very Robin Hood-esque.
Yeah. And they are connected. They're both set in the same universe. And I see my mom is asking some questions in the chat.
Yeah.
About how, so Starla, who's one of the main characters in the Bellari saga, I had kind of set her up as like, she's the child of these space pirates who, like, were notorious back in the day, and now she's living, or her godfather is another one of the main characters. So, when she's 15, like, her life is upended and she ends up living with him. And so when I wanted to write another series, I was like, well, what did her parents get up to? Because I bet they had a lot of fun. If they're these notorious space pirates, like, let's write some stories about them. So her parents are the main characters in Ghost Pirate, or in the Nancy Chronicles. So spoiler alert, there's a romance arc, and they definitely get together.
Yeah, you kind of know they're gonna. So if you'd written about them the way you do in the first book, and then they didn't get together, I think we would have all been sad. So where are those series for you? Where are those series as far as, is anything else going to happen in them? Are they pretty much done and you're on to other things? Or
yeah, so I'm still working on, or I had been working on book 5 of the Nancy Chronicles, and that is, I think at this point I will just kind of keep releasing books from time to time as I maybe work on other projects around it. So it's kind of meant to be an ongoing series. I have kind of an idea of like a 9-book arc, but I don't plan to just like sit down and crank all that out, but I love writing those books.
Something to keep coming back to as you work on other stuff.
Do
you think you'll write more of, even if they're not in the same world as After the Tide, do you think that you are gonna go that direction for a little while, just play around in some, maybe in that same length, or just in the same type of a little bit more of a fantasy vibe? Or
I don't know. I'm not sure what my next project would be after the 5th Nancy Chronicles book. It's also with my exciting new eye injury, like, work has become more difficult. So that timeline just got really upended for me.
And I because we had so many issues, my self-inflicted issues, I apologize to everybody on the recording in the very beginning. If anybody who's watching now didn't hear that Jessie's not wearing the eye patch just because it looks awesome. Fortunately,
and because I write Space Pirate.
And that you can go to Jessie's Instagram at Kwak Jessie. And if you have not been up on what's been going on, so because we didn't want to spend a lot of time in the interview, we wanted to focus on the books, but we didn't want to like pretend like nothing had happened either. And so if you would like to be caught up on what has been going on with her, and you can go to her Instagram page at Kwak Jessie, just Jessie Kwak backwards. It's and that simple. And you will be able to see all the saga that we wish hadn't been written. Oh, I have the fan question that I've been holding on to.
Oh, excellent.
This is very specific, so I apologize to those of you who haven't read the Nancy Chronicles, but maybe this will make you go and read them because they are super, super fun. In book 2, there's a race, And the fan wants to know if you have a background either in like being a fan of or just having gone and researched rally races, because she said, oh my gosh, this feels so much like rally racing. So she was just really curious whether that entered into the either the research or just personal experience. So
Yeah, no, I have not been a fan of really any sort of racing until like everyone, I got into Formula One with watching Drive to Survive on Netflix a couple of years ago. And so there was
yeah.
kind of that like, oh, it might be fun to do something like that. My husband he was a bike messenger. And so he used to do a lot of messenger races, which were kind of these, you could have a checkpoint, or you just got a list of checkpoints and you could go in any order. And whoever was fastest wins. And so it's partly about like, the city well enough and the routes well enough, and you can say this address is close to this, And so I took a little bit of inspiration from that, but then also from, some of the like rugged, I'm not even going to remember the names, like the Baja 500 or whatever it is, like those sorts of things. Yeah.
Well, the reason she was convinced that you must have had a background in some kind of rally racing is that rally racing, you have the two people in the car. And one is driving and the other one is giving the directions of where to go. And so it was really interesting. So apparently you hit that spot on. I haven't read book 2 yet, so now I have to read it. But so that was kind of fun. It was like, oh, this must have been having this. You also write books that are directed at people who are creative people, either for writing or any other creative process, crafting, music. I'm blanking out as to all the different things that could be on that list, but I'm curious where that came from, because that's a very different writing process than writing a fictional novel. And did that just grow out of mentoring that you were already doing, or was that something that just came out of things that you had found for yourself and wanted to share for other people?
Yeah, it really came from, I had been trying to figure out, I have a fascination with productivity and that how to be more efficient and more effective and work smarter, not harder, all those things. And so I, especially as a self-directed person, I've been freelancing for over 10 years now. And so I needed to figure out how to get everything done that needed done, like my business stuff, my fiction, as when you're your own boss, like you have to put on your boss hat and then take it off and put on your worker hat. And sometimes that's really hard if you've got all this, like, there's so many things you need to get done. And then you're just supposed to like set that aside and write about space pirates for an hour. How are you supposed to clear your brain for that? So I just had spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to do that. And I had kind of the idea that I wanted to write a book about it. And I was talking with Ellie Blue, who is one of the editors and owners of Microcosm Publishing here in Portland. And she was they were thinking about kind of doing a little foray into publishing novels. So we had been talking about publishing the book that eventually became Double Edged. And but they're very like kind of activist focused, very like social justice. And they've got a lot of, most of their stuff is kind of more like books with a message, which are awesome. But I gave her the manuscript and she was like, I really like what you're trying to do, but it does feel like you're writing two books. One is about this kind of like this more messagey bit, and then the other is about space gangsters. And she's like, and I feel like you're having more fun with the space gangsters. And I was like, I really am.
Always.
Yeah. So I ended up withdrawing that book. And then she was like, well, what else are you working on? And I was like, I've kind of been thinking about writing this book on creative productivity, and like kind of explained it to her. And she was like, let's do it. So yeah, so that's where that came from.
And I believe that all three of your creativity and productivity books are from Microcosm, aren't they?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Microcosm is great. You should go and check them out online. They're another local publisher. We
Yeah,
love
they do
local
such a great
publishers.
job with the like cover
Yeah.
design and the interior design and stuff.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
it's been awesome working with them.
Yeah. And I really love that. I really love these that they do have their, this is what they do, and this is their sort of little a clever word is failing me, but this is their niche. This is the
Yeah.
hole that they're trying to fill in publishing, and they do a really good job of it.
Mhm.
So the first, I can't remember can you go through the list of the three? 'Cause I
Yeah,
know
so
the
there's
last one, but I
From
don't
Chaos to
remember.
Creativity, which
Okay.
is the kind of general productivity guide for creative brained people. And then there's From Big Idea to Book, which is
Okay,
specifically about
yeah.
the writing process.
And I have that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how to go from how to come up with ideas, how to do your first drafts. And both of these are, I call them like choose your own adventure guides to coming up with a process that works for you. I mean, I don't write that down because I would get sued by choose your own adventure, but choose your own path.
Yeah,
guides.
yeah.
And so there, in both of those, I interview a bunch of different people and say, okay, you might try outlining, but it might not work for you. So maybe you'll try just pantsing it or whatever. And so it's not prescriptive. It's not, here's my way of doing it, and that's the only way that works. And so then the third book is called From Dream to Reality. And that's about making a living as a freelance writer. So that is really specifically aimed towards if you want to be a freelance copywriter, which is what I've done for the last 10 years. Like, here's how to get started. Here's how to run your business. And that one's based mostly on my own experience.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think that people don't realize that, you think, oh, you've got so many books out, you must be, this must just be your ticket to everything. And it doesn't really work like that. I think people are not really cognizant of the fact that regardless of whether you're self-publishing or being traditionally published, most writers have a day job.
Mm-hmm.
We hear about the big few Rick Riordans and J.A. Jances or whoever, who eventually can, quit their day job and do that full time. But there's lots and lots of very well-known writers out there that don't do that. Like they're doing other jobs because that's what you have to do. So I loved the idea of from the first one, the From Chaos to Creativity, because I do think it is really hard I finished my day job and now I'm going to go home and write, and now how am I going to clear my head and go somewhere else? And so I was going to let everybody know. I know that there's a little bit of delay with the chat, so I will wait a couple minutes so that this can get over you. But if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat. I have figured it out. That's what actually messed me up earlier, is I was trying to figure out how to see the chat, and I was like, okay, everybody, bye, we're done in 3 minutes or whatever it was. But
fastest vintage books live ever.
Yeah, exactly. So please feel free to pop in a question. I know some of you you saw Kathy's questions about Starla.
I did, but I didn't actually answer that. She asked, does Starla ever find her parents, and will you be writing more about her? And the answer to that is, or the answer to will I be writing more about her is yes. So I've got another Starla book planned for. Okay.
Because later. There's the Bellari Saga and the Nancy Chronicles, but aren't there a couple of like prequels or standalones that kind of fit in that same world as well?
Yeah. So I've got 3 kind of standalone novellas that are all kind of about characters that are in the Bellari Saga, 2 of which are really focused on Starla's journey. So I think what I'm probably going to do is write a 3rd novella that is set after the Bellari Saga that also is from Starla's point of view. So kind of that'll be she'll get 3 like focus books. Yeah.
Working title Writer's Room just says hi. I'm trying to see. I think I got all my questions in. So I am going to just give my after spiel, but if anybody pops a question in, we will get to that too. So feel free to still write them because my spiel is not that important. The questions are more important. But just to let everybody know, Jessie's book, After the Tide, releases next Tuesday officially, although I know that there's been some out there already for some events. And you can pre-order from us. And if you pre-order, you will get I think there's a zine in there. Why don't you, I'll let you tell them like all the different things that are going to be in the little pre-order.
Oh shoot, I thought I had it sitting out, but I don't. Yeah, so a bookmark, a short story zine, and then the postcard, which will be signed and personalized for you.
Yes.
But I also wanted to say, because I know some people only really do ebooks and things like that, I will send you a postcard no matter where you bought the book or in what form or what country you live in. So if you go to jessiekwak.com/tide, there's a little a link to a Google form where you can just fill out your information.
Yeah. And what's the story just popped in and wanted to know what's the easiest way to get all of your books. Of course, as the official Visit Vintage Book representative, I'm going to tell you that we have the full Nancy Chronicles series in the store right now. And we also have the 2 books that Jessie edited, Crooked Volume 1 and 2. And we didn't get to talk about those tonight, but maybe in a future interview, we'll talk about those again. You have short stories in those books, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. And in addition to a lot of other local and national writers, crime in space, I believe, or crime.
They're all sci-fi crime stories.
Yeah. So those 2 are in the store. So of course we'd love you to get them from us, but you also can go to Jessie's website, which I will let Jessie say again.
Yeah, so jessiekwak.com, and that'll have links to, you can buy print books from me and also ebooks. I sell them direct through my website, and audio as well.
So and then of course, I mean, I'm hoping we'll get the Bellari saga into the store. I have to talk to the rest of the crew about shelf space because there's a lot.
As I showed you, they take up a lot of space.
But so if you weren't going to get them right away, I'd say, hey, come and buy them at Vintage. But if you want them right away, please do go to Jessie's website and grab them all because they're lovely and just fun. I mean, honestly, it's perfect for right now when you have to be stuck in your house because it's so dang hot outside. Read a fun space crime heist novel and you'll feel much better. Jessie will also be in the store, and I realize I believe it's the 26th. I don't have my calendar right in front of me, so let me get one here. Yeah, she'll be in the store at 3:00 on the 26th. It's going to be very informal. We'll probably have her read a little bit. We'll have her read maybe something a little bit different than she read tonight. And then I may ask her a couple of questions, probably similar to what we did tonight, just so that people who didn't get to see this will be able to hear them. But we'll keep that part short, and then everybody will just be able to say hi to Jessie. And if you want to wait if you've pre-ordered and you want to wait to pick up the book until you see Jessie live in person, you can do that. We will probably be reaching out to people and asking what they prefer, if they want to have them delivered right away or if they want to wait. But yeah, you can just say hi, you can hang out with everybody, and yeah, so that'll be the 26th at 3:00, and the book releases a week from today on the 22nd. So yeah, come and see us, come and pre-order the book, say hi to Jessie on the 26th. And I don't see any other questions tonight.
See how cute it is. It's adorable.
It is so cute. And it's not just that it's like thin, it's also just like the size is smaller than another book. So it's just you can hold it in your hands really easy. And honestly, I didn't get to this tonight. Maybe we'll have to talk about, this is what we'll talk about. Saturday is the cover on the 26th, because I really love the cover. So that's a teaser, right? I'll write that down. We can talk about it on the 26th. So you'll all have to come to that if you want to know the answer. But thank you so much, Jessie. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you, everybody in the audience. Thank you for being patient with my little technical snafu. I'm thankful that you all jumped back in after all of that. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here.